In a world that changes daily, defense and security specialists, men and women in uniform, are working 24/7 all week long, in harsh and ever-changing conditions, to keep the peace close to home and far away. The Dutch industry is convinced these men and women should have the best equipment at their disposal. They get their mission from the government, their tools from us. Our professionals think we should solve tomorrow's problems today. Their equipment is mission critical and should be durable. That's why Dutch experts develop radar systems that can spot a can in space. Fireproof materials that protect military personnel and sensors that can make people visible under any condition. We work on the best Navy vessels, airplanes, satellites, and armored vehicles. We contribute to future deployments with cybersecurity and drone interception. We are NIDV, the Netherlands Industry for Defense and Security. We are well aware how much ahead the Dutch industry is with regard to innovative production and technology. We work on both a national and international level to ensure that the men and women that keep us safe have the best tools at their disposal. We bring together law enforcement, fire departments, knowledge institutions, industry, and the armed forces. In this golden triangle, we enable innovation, cooperation, and employment. We provide platforms with combined strength for new international connections and for sustainable contracts between suppliers and users. The NIDV provides correct information regarding public contracts and questions about projects, government, and challenges. We advocate the interests of all parties and provide services to ensure everything goes as planned. As connectors and matchmakers, we organize fairs and events for the top domestic and foreign players, together with the Ministry of Defense and Ministry of Economic Affairs and Climate Policy. We are the Netherlands Industry for Defense and Security. Let's get to know each other so we know what to expect and need for a safe ecosystem.
Laat maar komen.
Stapje op, aanblikje af. Ja, we zijn begonnen met de oefening Zebra Sword.
So this is a big drill throughout the Netherlands, so it's a big challenge, and we do that so that we keep sharp, that we're ready for whatever is coming our way in the Netherlands.
Ja, we zijn net gestart met...
So we now have just started our drill, and some units are up and running, and of course supplies. And we have a huge logistics installation, and that's been ongoing. I'm very satisfied.
deze locatie.
This is the location where we receive all goods, nutrition, spare parts, fuel, and this is the location that distributes everything across the units throughout the Netherlands. Of course, we thought about how we could best execute what we need to do without endangering everybody, especially the citizens, and this is how we did it. We, of course, drilled in our own bases, and of course, we protect our own by taking into account all the measures that were recommended to us from the government when it comes to COVID-19. And of course, in certain vehicles, we are very, very close to each other, and then we have created a bubble, an operational bubble, if you will. And that is basically your family situation at that moment. Drills are important, but if it's necessary, then of course we can immediately switch to extra support to provide that support to our country in the COVID-19 crisis. I think we are now already using people in the University Hospital in Utrecht, and we are going to help people in the big test streets, and then of course deploying our men and women in the Netherlands has priority over anything else at this moment.
Goedemiddag.
Good afternoon. Welcome to NEDS 2020, the main stage event, digital. Of course, normally we are all together in Ahoy, Rotterdam, but this year everything's different. So also we are now located in Hendrik Ido Ambacht, and this event was created within a couple of weeks by everybody's effort, and thanks to the Ministries of Defense and Economic Affairs, TNO, Thales and ILIAS, we made it to what it is today. The subject of today is resilience. Just like many other industries, our security industry, of course, has had to adapt as well. And what we're going to do for the coming 90 minutes is talk about how we did it, what did we learn. And we do that with interviews, dialogues and videos, and of course we have awards.
You can do so by looking at the button at the left-hand side of your screen. If you press there, then you can follow all of this in English. And to all of you accounts that if you want to use the network function, that's also on the left-hand side of your screen. Don't use it now, because we'll now start with our program, but you can use it later on. Naast mij zit de voorzitter van het NEDS.
Next to me, the chair, Hans Hillen. Good afternoon, how are you? We are in a nice bar here. Yes, you know what, in Hendrik Ido Ambacht there's a lot of business, but there is time for relaxation too. Well, you know what, isn't it incredible that something that was planned as a fair in no time was turned into an online presentation, and I have to say I am very enthusiastic. It is running very smoothly. Okay, we are going to show everybody what it looks like. We are getting up and we will walk to the main stage, and then we'll talk to each other a little bit more. Yes, from the bar to modern times.
Kijk, dan gaan we hier naar rechts.
So we take a right turn and we are now walking over.
nou zie.
And here we are. Your office for the coming 90 minutes. We're going to move from left to right and we are going to look at everything they have to offer. And our audience is, of course, not only people from government, but also from business side, corporate life. You were former Minister of Defense and now you're chair of NIDV. If you would have to characterize the biggest difference between this and a ministry, well, if you're a minister, you're much further away from everything. You're now right on top of things. You're right on top of the industry, the processes, and a minister is very much distracted by day-to-day events and doesn't really see it. And I must admit that being a chair of NIDV gives me the opportunity to be closer to businesses. And that is great because we have a great business life. So nobody envies a minister then. Well, sometimes you just have to suffer to be able to lead the way, right? Okay, so our theme, resilience. How resilient was NIDV over the past months? Well, of course, some of the people, ex-military, they never stop. They get up and they come with solutions. So they're very resilient. And the private industry, you see that things are about to change, then of course they just organize it in a different way. So, something that was supposed to be a fair, that is very famous, that is always popular, turned into such a great online event. And now you see that modern technology gets us places. And so NIDV did well, yes, good to hear. And you have two stakeholders, obviously. You have the Ministry of Defense, Ministry of Justice and Security. So, of course, not only the armed forces, but also the police. So how is the collaboration between the two? Getting better and better. Not because we like each other so much, we do, but because our security, international and national security, are intertwined. And especially since we now are all so much aware of the fact that crime knows no boundaries and how they try to hide their actions. That's not national, that's international. And you see that whatever the armed forces can do for the police can do for the armed forces. And this applies to the intelligence services too. So basically, it's two leaves on the same branch. And I'm pretty sure that we can work together when it comes to procurement as well. All of you who are watching, you see that we are really moving fast. So this is straight away our next part of the show. So this is our award. We are going to announce who has won. And I'm pretty sure that not everybody knows what we're referring to. Why do we have this award? So it applies to both the ministries and NIDV. We all value startups greatly because startups help us, and each era has its own characteristics, and our era is about destructive innovation. What we come up with today is normal tomorrow and obsolete the day after. So how can you find your way if you have a great idea? You need to be able to find your way and get your ideas across. And we try to invite startups to have them showcase what they have, what their thoughts are. And this was very much promoted by the Ministry of Defense and Economic Affairs. And, we have seen some great stuff. People will find all of that in a digital environment, right? And what is the prize? Because it's an award, but it's a prize. Well, we are not going to give money to the winner because they burned up enough of money in the startup itself, I guess. They will have the opportunity to promote themselves. The first prize is a wonderful prize. They will have the opportunity to go to a fair in Washington, very close to the Pentagon, SAS. It's water, air, and space. And they will have the opportunity to have a stand there. It's paid in full by the ministry, and they can showcase their quality to the rest of the world. And for a startup, that is very much first prize. Isn't that the way to go from startup to scale up? Exactly. Yes, you need to let people know that you're out there. That's the prize. Great. So how did the nomination process go? We will announce the top 3+ winner, but how did they get there? Well, they were selected by the ministries, and we had a short list of 20, and they were able to present themselves. And by voting, everyone who has been watching was able to cast a vote. And, you know, by a popular vote, it's number 1, 2, and 3. So basically, the viewers decided who won. And everyone was wondering why you were holding that envelope. Well, now that's clear, because you are holding the winner. Yes, it was handed to me. And that's the number 1, 2, and 3. Number 3. It's X systems. It's a system to be able to communicate wirelessly. It's a great product. Number 2, Quintec. Quintec Energy, which is, again, also wireless communication. And then the number 1. Sorry, that is about storing energy. And number 1 is Dynection. And Dynection is basically a digital detective. They can detect drugs, explosive, anything they can track down digitally. Dynection is the winner and therefore has the opportunity to go to the Pentagon, to a fair, to showcase their startup. And this is exactly what the award was intended for. Thank you, Mr. Hillen. We will see each other in the bar at the very end of today's plenary session. We will continue the program now. And you already learned that startups are very important for NIDV and for the industry. And that this is why we wanted to talk to one of the ambassadors of startups in the Netherlands, which is, together with Maarten Lutjen, who is talking to him. And we are going to look at this interview and dialogue. Maarten, who are you with?
Roderik. Well, Roderik, thank you very much. I am in an interview with His Royal Highness Prince Constantijn. Thank you for cooperation and your interest shown in NIVD. You know, the Exhibition for Defense and Security. This year we have a digital environment, and when you hear this, the cooperation with defense and with larger organizations is often about money and orders, but are there matters that are also important, let's say access to maneuver grounds or... Well, yes, the defense market is a big market, first of all, and a lot of money is spent on it, and we also heard that lots of internet developments once had an origin in the defense systems. So in itself, it is a driver for innovation. And I believe that mainly for startups, it's important that through the defense systems, you can also have access to other markets. When standards are agreed, when protocols are designed, that they can be rolled out, let's say, in other NATO countries or throughout Europe. And that's a very good opportunity for an entrepreneur to open up a big market. So what's important for an organization such as the defense? What are their benefits in their cooperation with startups? Well, I believe that it doesn't just apply to defense, but also larger organizations. People are in fixed patterns, and startups must do something new. Otherwise, they won't have an opportunity to compete with existing systems, existing companies. So the exciting thing is for the defense organization to cooperate with startups is to be challenged, to do new things, or maybe to do things not the old way, but in a much more efficient way, to get input from the outside world about how things can be done differently. Are there innovations or examples of innovations that started with startups that have indeed been applied in the defense organization industry or the security industry? I should better ask you this question. Of course, there are many, many examples of this. very close to the Defense Organization, cyber security, but you have steering systems, driving systems, operating systems. There are startups that launch satellites now and pass on information that may not be at a military level, but very close to that level. So you see that these worlds are moving closer together now in America, where NASA is starting to outsource to SpaceX, which is also a startup. You see that there isn't any domain that is fully in control of the government, and you can see that in lots of fields, startups can have really good contributions. Sometimes you hear that the defense organization, large government organizations, are really tight on rules. It's very difficult to pass their tendering procedures. As you say, many rules. Maybe less rules, fewer rules. Maybe define what you want, but not how. How, of course, may provide different solutions than you would imagine. In various tendering fields, the government does not just indicate what they want to achieve, but also how they want to achieve it. So that means that you're recycling knowledge from the past and define things from the past anew, and the only competition you can achieve is on price. But maybe you need to do the things differently, so you don't want to define how to do it. You want to leave that up to the people that may have a different perspective on the matter and give you surprising solutions. So being open to new ideas. Yes, and I would like to add, indeed, you have to have an experimental culture. A small business or a startup business, it's very difficult for such a business to indeed provide a ready-on-the-shelf project.
Zijn dus om daartussen te komen.
Now, so it is not easy to enter into such markets, but it's also very good to experiment, but everybody experiments at a later stage. So we said that it's sometimes a disease in which a lot of startups discuss a lot with authorities, not about serious contracts. So I would like to say experiment. So, well, ladies and gentlemen, technical challenges are always there. So there is a small technical glitch right now, and we are trying to remedy that. What I will do right now, and I will hear whether that's okay or not, is that I will introduce the people that are ready for an interview here today. At some time, I will discuss with you. I will hear when this is. Let me just introduce you. First of all, Vice Admiral Arie Jan de Waard, Director of the Materiel Organization, and then Christiaan Dicke, Commissary at the Ministry of Economic Affairs. Diana Verweij, you are the Deputy Commander, Healthcare Organization of the Defense Organization. And last but not least, Harald, Kokelkoren, the Director of ILIAS Solutions, one of the partners of today. Now, all of you are already here. And we will no doubt look at more videos, but I indeed wanted to start with you, Mr. de Waard. The Prince just talked about, in his presentation, about startups. And that startups would be best facilitated not just by experiments, but that they would indeed get support so that a product will be indeed accepted, not just a pilot. Do you know that feeling when you talk from the perspective of the defense organization? Indeed, if you don't get things done at the defense organization at the end, then of course it will not materialize. Now, really getting things achieved and getting them into operation, that is a challenge. We just saw the video of the NIDV, but I would like to challenge them to make a more topical video, because they are talking about the golden triangle, but it's a golden ecosystem, not the usual suspects, not the big businesses. Of course, we will continue to speak to them, the knowledge institutions that we work with. But why do I call it an ecosystem? It's also about the startups, the small businesses, the innovations from the outside, to indeed reach out to them. And it is complicated. It's all about tendering rules, all about how to make agreements up front, and how indeed to cross the valley of death. It's not just a challenge for the defense organization, it's a challenge for many startups. And indeed, it has a much wider scope. And for those viewers, you are from the Defense Materiel Organization. You are in charge of anything the defense organization buys. Yes, we want to have the best possible materiel for our military staff. It's procurement indeed, but we have to make sure that we get the good things in. Now, I will talk to the others in this room later. I understand now that the videos are okay, so I will see you later.
Roderik, hartelijk.
Roderik, thank you very much. I am in an interview with His Royal Highness Prince Constantijn. Your Royal Highness, thank you for being interested in NEDS, the Exhibition for Defense and Security, and this year in a digital environment. When you hear this, cooperation with the defense organization and larger organizations is often about money and orders. But are there other matters important? Access to exercise grounds or systems? To startups, yes, I believe so. The defense organization is a big market. First of all, a lot of money is spent on it. Secondly, and we also noticed that lots of the internet developments once had an origin in the defense organization. Defense itself is an organization in which lots of challenges are faced. And I think for startup it's important that through the defense organization they have access to the European market. So when standards are agreed, when there are protocols, when there are solutions that are conceived in the Netherlands, that they will be rolled out in other NATO countries or in the rest of European countries, that would be a very good opportunity for entrepreneurs to launch the products in a larger market. What's important for organizations such as the defense organization? What are the benefits in cooperation with startups and scale-ups? Well, I believe actually it doesn't just apply for the defense organization, but for larger businesses too. They are thinking along fixed patterns, and startups by definition need to do something new. Otherwise, they won't have an opportunity to compete with existing systems, existing businesses. That leaves only money to compete on. The exciting thing for the defense organization to cooperate is to be challenged, to do new things. Maybe other ideas can be used in a much more efficient way to have a perspective from the outside on how things might be done differently. Are there innovations or are there examples of innovations that were started by startups that have been applied in the defense organization or the security industry? I would say you'd be the better person to answer that question. Of course, many, many examples exist. Some of them are very close to the defense organization. Let's say cybersecurity, but there are operating systems. There are startups that launch satellites nowadays, pass on satellite data, not perhaps at a military level, but very close to that level. We see that these worlds are moving in much closer. When you look at America, there was a very extreme example. The NASA is now starting to outsource a lot also to SpaceX, which is also a startup. And you see that no domain is actually fully in control of the government. So all fields have private suppliers that have very interesting solutions. Lots of people say that the large organizations and the defense organizations are really strict on rules, that it's very difficult to access them. How can we make it more easy? Well, let me say, fewer rules. Perhaps also define what you want to, but not how you want it. How often offers interesting solutions. I think in lots of tenders, the government does not just indicate what they want to achieve, but also how they want to achieve it. And that means that you will only recycle knowledge from the past and redefine solutions from the past, and only price is an option to compete on. But if you look at quality to compete on, you might want to do things differently. You don't want to define how to do it. You want to leave that to people that may have a new perspective, a fresh perspective. So being transparent, being open to new ideas. Well, and I would like to add, you have to have an experimental culture. A small business, a startup business, finds it very difficult to provide a ready-made product on a large scale in a system such as the Defense Organization, in which lots of products have to cooperate, collaborate. It's not very easy to enter into that system. So it's very important to experiment, but not just to leave it at experimenting. It's a type of disease that will mean that the government is starting pilots all the time. So pilotodontism. And I would like to say, let's not just experiment, but indeed also make sure that the products are launched when they have good solutions. Now, there is a maze of who do I approach, where do I go, who can help me in the organization. How could we facilitate that for startups? Well, I think you can draw lessons from businesses. It's not different. You have to have one single desk, but that desk must be linked up very clearly to the rest of the organization. Because what will happen typically is that there is a desk and they have a good cooperation with the startup business, then they need to sign a contract. And there's lots of red tape in tendering or in perhaps somebody that has to execute it says that's not what I asked for, it's offered by you. It's a toy for the innovation team. You don't want just to have an innovation team. You have to make sure that it is embedded in your organization. So you have to make sure that you really use this in your organization. So an innovation team can be a contact, indeed, but they shouldn't be isolated in the organization. What you also indicated is that it's very important that the mode of operation of big organizations and the industry can be different and can be better adjusted to startups and scale-ups. Well, it always works both ways. What is not effective is an organization that says we will help startups. No, that's not useful. Startups are serious businesses that want to grow. Of course, they may need some assistance, but they don't want actually just support. The defense organization must really want their solution and be aware that such innovations will further the defense organization. And then they have to organize it to make it successful. Now, what often happens is that they stick at a level in which they will support and it's interesting and we will have a demonstration. It's a great solution, but we'll not buy it. That's not useful for the startup and not for the defense organization. So when you start a cooperation with innovations from the outside with startups, it has a huge impact on the organization that really operates the tendering process. They have to standardize, they have to prepare themselves to make sure that the cooperation will have an impact. I would like to thank you for the interview and good luck with your conference. I would like to close now. So I would now like to give the floor to Roderik once again in Hendrikje.
Thank you, Maarten, and a very clear message from the Prince. And of course, a startup has to go beyond a pilot. Yes, be a client of a startup. And I am now with the host of today, Mr. Heilenkeren. Of course, at Bolidt, we are a guest of Bolidt today. Can you talk to us about what type of company Bolidt is? Because not everybody knows. Yes, Roderik, of course. Bolidt is a family-run business that has been around for about 60 years and focuses on synthetical materials and developing those materials in various industries like the medical industry, car manufacturing, offshore, shipping. So you are both active in the civil market and the military market. Is that a strategic choice? Yes, it is. And that has to do with one word, which is innovation. If you look behind you, you see the impressive lab that we have here at Bolidt, and more than 20 people every day work on perfectioning and further developing and developing new materials for the 5 markets that I've mentioned. So innovation is the key word, if you will. In the civil industry, of course, we have a principle that we call fail fast, fail often, and fail cheap, which means that we have a lot of test cases and we can then quickly decide, okay, this works and this doesn't work. That principle does not apply to the military industry, however, because tendering projects with the ministry are very complex and the outcome is unpredictable, which means that at the front end, you don't want to burn too much money and, start all kinds of fail processes because you lose a lot of money in that way. So what is then important with the defense organization? We have the launching customership. The defense organization asks us to help them develop certain things. We do that together with all the knowledge institutions and other players in the industry. That's important because it means that you can generate a lot of innovation. So both military and civil, that has its roots in the fact that a discovery in one world can lead to a lot of innovation in the other world. So the combination leads to success, and the success is displayed in this wonderful building. Thank you very much, Huub. Let's move on. We are back in the studio, the main event room. I have already introduced you. And what we are going to do is we are going to look at several videos. We look at the different departments of the armed forces. We will see the police in action, talking about how they got through these difficult months. And I will, of course, ask some questions about what we are going to see. But, Mr. Dicke, with you, I would like to talk to you about what the Prince was saying in his interview, which is the fact that startups could go into Europe through the defense organization. It could be active within NATO. And I have a question, but please first explain. I introduced you as an officer from the Ministry of Economic Affairs, but what does your organization do? Well, if there's procurement of material abroad, if it's more than 15 million, we are looking at opportunities in the Dutch corporate life to contribute to that. For example, producing the landing gear for an Apache or a great engagement of TNO for certain research. So if we are procuring internationally, we try to involve the Dutch industry. That could work the other way, right? You could also help Dutch companies showcase themselves on a European level. How does that work? Well, it is difficult, especially for startups. So I'd say if you're a startup and you want to go into Europe, do that together with a large player in the Netherlands or an international player. And we can be intermediaries if you want. And another solution is participate in innovation competitions that all ministries have, all ministries of defense and NATO as well. These are two great routes to position yourself on the international playing field. And I think Harald can talk about that because he knows about this. How you can do that together with a big player. Harald, yes, absolutely. And I would really like to sort of promote the startups that have those great ideas. I was once in a startup with software. We are 20 years old now. We're no longer a startup, but it feels like a startup. Yes, software developers. First of all, you have to make that difference. You have to have that added value. That's, of course, that comes first. But if you then can sell to a original equipment manufacturer, if you can convince them, we do a lot with Lockheed Mountain. And with Lockheed Mountain, we can go all over the world. And that made a difference for us. So that is my advice. Make a difference through an OEM. And I think definitely that also your organization can make the difference. Yes, with our participation, we can just nudge them. Yes, so now they know who to go to. Your phone will start ringing pretty soon. I already announced several videos, the different parts of the military. We will start with the Navy. And Petra Huis-Innetveld is going to do an interview.
Dankjewel, Roderik.
Thank you, Roderik. We are here in Den Helder with the Royal Navy. And next to me, we have the Commander at Sea, Rob Kramer. Admiral, what were your concerns when the COVID crisis hit us? Well, what was most on my mind is how do I keep my staff ready to go? For two purposes. Of course, the normal readiness to go, but also possibly to be the backup for society when society calls on us. So how do we keep our staff fit and ready to go? That was my main concern at that moment. And then, on board, how did you deal with infections on board? Well, we made a plan, obviously. How can we make sure that we prevent infections from happening, and how do we deal with it when it does happen, of course? It means isolation at the front end of the crew at the beginning, and then we stay in the port in a bubble, then we sail out. Or when it's the Marines, of course, into the field. Of course, stay close to the home port. And then, of course, if we cross to the west, of course, go along the coast that if things go wrong, you can drop people off. If we find an infection, we do immediate isolation and as quickly as possible, of course, take them off the ship, making sure that you reduce the chance for infections to others. And all the vessels of the Navy are produced in the Netherlands, so you know the design very well. Do you have any messages for the industry as to how you have to design these vessels to be able to deal with such a pandemic? Well, I think we would actually have to focus on the health of the individual military. So my people are healthy and fit, so think about enough space to live in, living room, the size of the cabins, how you can exercise, how you live together, so you could think about air ventilation systems, but also looking at the medical support that is very important at the front end and monitoring the individual health of all the military staff and the Marines. Can you tell us how resilient the Navy is in these times of COVID-19? Well, obviously we are super resilient. And I'm laughing, but I am serious. I have deep admiration for all my staff. And, you know, we've been in this crisis for about 8 months, and it's just great to see how they have dealt with it. Of course, working from home, if they have to and if it's possible. Also on board, but still keeping that distance. And if not, then you see a lot of resilience and coordination. We are resilient, and we actually have been able to keep ourselves ready to go and to maintain that level. So all operations were able to go ahead. Obviously, we had to improvise, but that is resilience. That's what we're good at, being the military. Many operations had to be reshaped, but the big chunks, we were able to do it. You know, we went to our training in the mountains with our fleet. Of course, we did some drills in the Mediterranean area with our squadrons. We did drills, so in the end, it turned out well. This was NIDV TV. Thank you, Ron, Mr. Kramer, and back to you, Hendrik Idio Ambacht, Bolidt. Right. We were very confused because we all knew Rob Kramer, but Peter Huizing was a change. Of course, it was Ron Mulkens, director of NIDV. So all the interviews that we're going to see are being conducted by staff of NIDV, so isn't it great that we introduced someone else to you as well? Ms. Verweij, I would like to start with you. I already introduced you as acting commander for the Health Organization of Defense. So enlighten us, what are your day-to-day duties? We are responsible for supplying all healthcare to military who are in their home bases, so in the Netherlands, Germany, Caribbean, or wherever in the world. And we also have separate departments for occupational health care. We have medical training and, of course, logistics for medical products. So Mr. Kramer was saying, he was talking about the bubble on board. It was a nice narrative. What can you say to us about that? Because it was on your plate. Well, the most important thing about healthcare is not getting sick, right? And that is, of course, what we want to do. We want to prevent people from getting sick. And what the Navy did really well is they asked everybody go home and go in isolation, not at the table together, not going for grocery, not going to the beach, stay in your room. And then when all these people come together, you are pretty sure that they have not been infected. And then you can bring them together. I think they all sailed out on the Johan de Witt. It's not a small vessel, but it was a very limited group. And this principle can be applied to much smaller units. So that's a bubble. Okay, great. So how did you look at that? All these COVID matters around your staff. So what else did you do? And I think we all followed the guidelines from government. So hygiene, keeping that distance, wear a face mask. So Air Force and Army do that. And we have, of course, all these rules for our own bases. And, of course, work from home wherever we can. We are a security organization. So it does mean that not everybody can go home. So for my organization, you know, the IT company had to go on. Fuel, of course, had to be supplied. Clothing, the production. So people are working on location, but under the circumstances that are prescribed and advised to us. Wash your hands, face mask, keep the distance, etc. We all apply that. Okay, so you're all focused on innovation and new ideas to get ahead. So we can also see such a COVID crisis as an opportunity, right? Do you have any examples from robotization or artificial intelligence that we were already working on, but, you know, accelerated because of this crisis, getting us ahead? Just looking at all of you here. An example, maybe. Yes, an obvious and simple example with ILIAS is that we had been working for a while now on something we call computer-based training. So the users that we have worldwide, you know, for scalability purposes, that's also relevant. But people were always sort of resisting that. And because of COVID now, we have had a great opportunities to turn that around. You know, we have a high demand for online training. And is it as scalable as we thought it was? So, you know, you see that the acceptance level for innovation increases if it fits with the situation you're in. Any other examples? Well, if I had said, you know, we are going to continue to work as we did, like we did in the past few months, nobody would accept that for the future. But we learned that it is possible, isn't it? And that brings you into different ways of training, simulators, artificial intelligence. And I really do believe now, I think Jitse Kramer is going to publish a book, you know, the work is going to go out of the office. I do believe that. But we have all realized that we've missed being in touch with an actual person. So having that interaction, you know, that can't be at a distance. So, you know, we learned, but we did learn a lot under that pressure. And this accelerated things, right? Things that might have been more complicated. Yes, it's exactly that. You know, the time frame has not been long enough, but I think, you know, at the very beginning we were like, oh, this is way too difficult and way too complex. And we are now ready to see things with an open mind because we know that it can work for us. We know that things can be an alternative. And actually improvements that we found in healthcare. Of course, personal interaction is very relevant, but the question is whether you have to do it all the time and whether we can change it. The things that we do now is, of course, we have our GP coming into the living room. a couple of years ago, they said, we can't have an online interview. We have to see you in person. The insurance company wants it. And you know what? Suppose that we have a GP and a patient has a question, and the GP can then call in live to the specialist, the medical specialist in the hospital, and can ask that question. It's good for the patient. It's not about, digital possibilities. It's about what is best for the patient. So indeed, COVID has brought us good things too. Let's move to another video. We have now seen the Navy. We are now going to go to the Air Force. And are we going to go to Peter Huis in het Veld? Let's see. Someone from NIDV anyway. Let's take a look.
Ja, dankjewel Roderik. Ik ben op bezoek in Breda.
Well, thank you, Roderik. I am visiting in Breda with the Air Force commander. Did the Air Force experience any problems with deliveries from the industry? Yes, I think we all experienced effects from the corona crisis, mainly in the first period as of March. And what we noticed is that similar to the industry, the Air Force also had to adapt to the new situation. And we noticed that the services that were provided, let's say repair for our aircraft, stopped. It took a few weeks to get that going once again. So indeed, that was a time that we had to discuss that together and to make sure how we could start up quickly. So indeed, we noticed the effects, but then they really recuperated, they recovered. So it's good to hear that. Do you see differences between foreign and Dutch industry? Well, you see a number of Dutch businesses, I have to say, that were quite on the ball when it's about quick recovery. Making sure that service provision could continue. And of course, that's very important to us. We have partners with which we cooperate on Woensdrecht Air Base, for instance. We do lots of things with other parties. And I also think it's good to see how many Dutch companies really recovered very soon. I think it's good. It says something about the power in Dutch businesses and the way in which they recovered also in this corona crisis. Now, these were heydays for hackers, perhaps. Were you worried about the security of IT within the Air Force? Well, it's a continuous concern, of course. And I think, actually, you will never do enough. It's also about awareness to start with. Making sure that people realize very well what the risks are, also what their responsibilities are, what roles they play, to train them, to make them aware in their work, and to make sure that you monitor your systems and you know where the risks are, and that you actually pay attention to that. It's not. There was a reason why the Air Force focused on cyber teams, to make sure that these cyber teams also scrutinize cybersecurity. Now, can you explain how resilient the Air Force was when it took care of its tasks? Well, during the corona crisis, we mainly noticed in the things that we're good in. And what we're good at is really improvising, making sure that we can switch gears very quickly when the situation is changing. There was a pandemic that, of course, had a lot of impact on our operations, but it was good to see how quickly our people were able to adapt, to make sure that we could organize different ways of working together and really get to grips with this situation. When you look at this year, you see that we hardly suffered any losses, and I'm really proud of that. So thank you. That's a very good conclusion for this interview, and let's move back to Roderik in the studio. Well, various themes are discussed. Cybersecurity, on the ball, what did he call this? How well businesses really anticipated. I want to continue with you on that, starting with cyber security. Mr. Kokelkoren, you said with ILIAS you are in IT. Were you bothered more than at other times by hackers, by cyber attacks? Unfortunately, we are attacked every day. That used to be the case, it's still the case. And the general said it very clearly, it's mainly about awareness. Being aware. Everybody within the organization needs to be aware. You can do a lot in respect of processes. CMC, it's a standard hub we have to meet to make sure that we can do business in the States. Systems must be deployed, but awareness of the employees, that's key. So that's what we work on. Now, if I were one of your employees, how can I be aware? Well, in two ways. There are more ways, but at least 2. There's a good book. It's War for a Person That Notices It. I think everybody should read that book. It's in Dutch. It's a sort of James Bond story. And all of a sudden you say, okay, but this is real. It was written some time ago, so things really got worse. I think it will open your eyes to this, and you will see that people are the weakest links, even in highly secured businesses. Secondly, from the systems, you can also fake that hackers enter without your employees noticing it. And indeed, it is a problem when you are the one that clicked on the email, and it was me. And I say that because I think you have to have the right attitude. So I'm very much aware, and still I clicked on the link. It was a very sharp email. It was done by one of our own staff members. So they really ended up at your desk. Yes, indeed, they went into my room and they said, this is the one. There weren't any serious consequences, but of course, even if you are aware, it will still happen. So be aware. Be alert. I think you recognize it. Yes, we do. Yes, you have to be alert in all situations. A second theme that was mentioned is that Dutch businesses were really on the ball. They were quick in responding. Of course, you have a lot of contacts, Mr. Quick, with foreign businesses. Did you notice that we did it better? No, not really. I think that there is a difference in military productions. People that manufacture military goods have adopted very quickly. Businesses in general do, but also the measures with regard to working at home when you can, at work when you have to, that they were very smart in designing systems to work with, tools to work with, and acted really quickly to make sure that manufacturing but also maintenance continued. And I see it throughout the chain. So that's an international chain. So unfortunately, we can't say that we did even better. No, of course, we are pragmatic as Dutch people, and that's what you notice. I think it's part of the flexibility and the possibility to adapt. So I think that being pragmatic is a good idea. Now, we looked at 2 parts of the armed forces. Let's look at businesses. Martin will have an interesting conversation. Well, thank you indeed. I'm with Thales in Hengelo in Nederland. I'll talk to the CEO of Thales, Gerben Edelijn. Welcome, Martin. Thank you. Thales is a business that has a civil part, but also a military orientation. I believe it was a good strategy for you. Yes, indeed. The civil market suffered more, mainly in aviation, but also in transport. They suffered more. And we see big growth in the defense organization, the defense market right now, also due to contracts we get from countries in Europe. Now, what does Thales believe about the measures, the temporary bridging measure for sustainable employment? I think, indeed, this measure for employment was a quick response by the government, and we also tried to start a COVID desk so that businesses could indeed ask questions, and NIDV helped us to facilitate that soon. Now, what does the current lockdown mean for Thales? You see that we are also hit by the measures. Most of our people work from home as well as they can. Some categories of people cannot, which are the people in the supply chain, the service departments. They work on site, and we try to do it as safely as we can. Now, the NEDS theme this year is resilience. Can you explain how resilient Thales is and how can you guarantee continuity? I believe that we adapted really quickly to the situation of working from home. You see that it is a continuous concern. We have to pay attention to it. And that's how we indeed advocate to make sure that there's a digital cloud environment for the security industry. It will not be beneficial now, but also for the future. So thank you for giving these clear answers. This was NIDV TV from the site Thales Hengelo. I will now give the floor once again to Roderik at Bolidt Innovation Center in Roderik. The floor is yours. Well, we are back. What is good to say is what wasn't addressed in the interview, that yesterday or the day before it was announced that Thales has concluded a very good deal and can hire about 200 extra people. So it's a success story in Corona times. Now, what was addressed is that the civil market was hit much harder than the military market. Both of you have contacts from the government with businesses. Do you recognize that? Well, this is a story that really speaks from the heart. I try to stress this in my position within the Ministry of Economic Affairs. But when you work both in the civil market and the military market, you are not as vulnerable and you can make sure that you can absorb these measures. You need resilience, you need the balance and diversification in your portfolio. When you do that, it's easier to survive in these times. And indeed, governments make an effort to make sure that military manufacturing continues, both in the countries where these industries are located, because these are vital sectors and they are designated as vital. But you have to think of OEMs, the large businesses that, let's say, manufacture aircraft. They say we will indeed spend extra money on the supply chain, and the extra costs that businesses have to incur will be for the benefit of this chain, because this chain must be upheld. What's also important is that in military manufacturing, there are long lead items. They have a long lead time. Now, we may address that when we talk about supply chains, that if it's a long lead, it is on the way and the manufacturing can be uninterrupted. This is what we heard from Bolidt. They operate in both sectors, which is an advantage. Yes, if you ask Bolidt, I believe that the part focusing on cruise ships is not active at all, but what you do for the Navy indeed continues. Is it something that has the preference from the government to work with parties that indeed operate in both segments, or isn't it viable? We buy the best what's available. That's what we do in IT. It's good, of course. I understand that the commissioner is stating this. It's good for businesses, but we really look the best that we can get for our officers. Now, if a business only has military products, we will buy there if it's the best product. No, I'm talking about a resilient society. When you have a manufacturing line that does both sectors, no, we don't actually do that. We will only buy if you are diversified. That's not what we do. No, we agree on that, indeed. It's good to hear that, because we only focus on the defense markets. Now, Mrs. Verweij, are you also happy? Yes, I'm happy about this too. So let's move on, because this will get too cozy and the next video will be with the Army. Stefan Schaamsma of NEDV will have an interview.
Thank you, Roderik. We are here at Firestone Commando in Oldebroek at H.R.H. And we are watching a very large drill here. It's the Zebra Sword drill. And we have Martin Meijnen here next to us. General, thank you for freeing up your time for this interview. And as you know, the theme of NEDS this year is resilience. And in that light, I would like to pose some questions to you. First of all, what did the Army do to protect its people against pandemics like COVID-19? Well, great question. I think that we have reinvented ourselves by looking at all processes, because we have to be closer to each other than that 1.5 meters. And of course, we weigh those risks. This is why we have regular checks. And we continued with our drills and trainings with zebra swords to make sure that we are deployable. And we just did it. And I think you can all see what the result is of that. You know, the biggest change was for us that we needed to sort of focus on that. So how can technology support the defense organization in executing its responsibility, which is civil assistance? Well, of course, we feel very responsible. So we have our maneuver center, and it demonstrates how we can better support the civil structures. And of course, we use the capacities that we have, and it has a huge potential. We have our many subsystems that enables us to, it enables us to better let the system function better. So how do you contribute to keeping the supply chain going? Well, we have all kinds of measures. Of course, companies were asking for a declaration of being a vital industry, making sure that they could continue supplying us. And of course, we work together because we need our material, and you know, whether we were in a lockdown or not. Can you tell us how resilient the Army is when it comes to fulfilling its tasks? Well, very resilient. We continued with our drills. Where we are here, Zebra Sword was going to take place in Germany, but now we have limited ourselves to the Netherlands because we had to. And of course, we have to keep our eye on the ball, and that's what life is today. And most important is that you have seen our presence, you know, making sure that the Netherlands was resilient against the pandemic. And it's not always, you know, when a country is in crisis, we have to be there. And we do that with our medics, but also food supplies, but especially the command and control planning and organizing operations. That is what we do best. Come to us. And of course, come to the armed forces. You know, you're at the right address. Thank you, General, for contributing to this conference, and we wish you the best of luck with what you're doing. And thank you, and I would like to add to that we are not alone here. We have many partners, members of NIDV. We need all of you, making sure that also that we keep up with that resilient process. And again, we know that we are all looking forward to your answers and make sure that we can be resilient together and resilient in the Netherlands. And I think we can work that out together. Back to you, Roderik.
Ja, nou, ook dit weer een interessant.
Great interview. I just have to pick one of you. And one element that I would like to highlight is that not everything is possible keeping that right distance. Bring me to you, Ms. Verweij, because that would be your biggest concern, right? Is there an example of companies that you know of that have come up with more creative solutions, you know, making sure that the Army can do what it has to do and not maintaining that safe distance, but still keeping safe? Well, at this moment in technology, we don't see any solutions yet, but there are great opportunities for the future. And I think it was already said in the interview with the Navy, we are now doing it with the systems that we have based on threats from back then. But now we see different threats that are also very real, whether in this case it is an infection or an attack. How you contract it, it means that you have to do the same. So if you look at the layout of vehicles, vessels, now that we know, how are we going to change that? Because once you know, you cannot undo it. Are we considering filters, sensor technology? We have great opportunities there, but also human behavior. One of the things we could consider is robotization and innovation. We would like to know much more about a health status of an individual. You know that for certain diseases it's very clear when you have contracted an infectious disease if you have all kinds of ulcers, but you can't detect when someone's been infected with another disease. You know, we have to be able to respond to threats. So there are quite a number of things that, you know, challenge us. Basically, you're calling on all viewers who are in the industry to bring you the ideas because you need them, right? And we know that it is possible, but we just don't know how yet. We don't know what is out there. But who knows? There might be companies that are watching and that can give you that last nudge. Over to you. Of course, government has tried to support businesses in these times. How do you see that? Did they do a good job? Well, first of all, I would like to compliment the NIDV that was very fast in responding. All members, I must say, were very much involved through digital means. And I still remember Martin managing a first Zoom meeting, and it was impressive and it was fast. And I also understand that we know that certain projects were continued or started sooner. And again, with Lockheed Martin, I've experienced this as well. They also got the go-ahead from the States to just do it, you know. So in these difficult times, you know, we have received advance payments. So because of that situation, we were even able to grow. We have to grow. So you see that you can rely on the Defense Organization. They are a very important pillar for the economy to continue, and that is very admirable. Good to hear. Okay. We looked at businesses, we looked at the armed forces, we haven't looked at the police yet. So let's do that.
Hallo Roderik.
Thank you, Roderik. I'm here in Utrecht in the Van Deventerlaan 50 at the police, looking at Petra Bosman here, the Police Services Center. First question. How did the police handle the impact of the coronavirus? Of course, you understand that the impact was huge. Police, 60,000 people, biggest employer in the Netherlands. Many of them who work in the front line of society. And as of that moment, of course, they had to deal with the insecurities revolving around the COVID-19 virus. How do you resuscitate in these times? How can you work from your home? When is that possible? So we have made many adjustments, of course, looking at personal protective equipment. That was an issue. You want to be a good employer. You want your staff to be safe and healthy. You want to protect them against the virus, but also looking at all different types of processes that we had to go through for working from home. You know, how can we make certain processes digital? Just giving you an example here. We were able, in the end, within 3 weeks' time, to get people onto MS Teams within 3 weeks, 50,000 people using MS Teams. And as being a director of the Police Services Center, that was quite a feat. That's a great example of resilience, if you allow me. So after those first months, how did you take that to the next level, that challenge to tackle all these barriers? Well, I think we were all feeling that it was never going to be the same. And I don't want to be dramatic about that. So we all hope for a vaccine and, of course, that we can erase the virus. But what we learned from that first wave is that many things that we initially said it's not possible to do that digitally, now turns out that this is possible. Just to give you another example, until recently, we really believed that recruitment of new staff, you know, had to be in person to be able to assess, you know, if someone was fit and suitable. And in that first period, we recruited digitally, and everyone was able to see that this is possible, and it worked. So isn't it interesting? Because of that first wave, you made a complete switch to opportunities. So you have to bounce back, you have to be resilient, but I think you should keep the good things that we learned from that first wave. And you said it yourself in your introduction, this is the Van Deventerlaan, this is a relatively new building, And we are already thinking about a different function of a police station, for example, that will have much more an element of interaction rather than an office function. You know, people don't go to the office to sit behind the computer anymore. I'm convinced that we will find a different function for the police station. Okay, can you also tell us what the challenge is that COVID-19 brings to us compared to other policing responsibility? Well, I think that COVID will accelerate things. Of course, we were already considering things within the digital transformation process, so that was already ongoing. And again, COVID accelerated that process. Also, social innovations that go hand in hand with that also brought about that acceleration, because there was no other way, and this is why people started doing it, and now they have experienced that this is possible, and now it becomes interesting. So now COVID is not so much the trigger, but we still want to hold on to, you know, the momentum that we have gained in that time frame. Thank you, Petra, for your explanation about the digital transformation, and with those last words, you know, we are back to the studio. Yes, Ms. Bosman is saying, okay, we should hold on to that momentum for digital transformation. And that is the last thing that I want to say in this block before we go to the State Secretary. So the government works with innovation hubs, I understand, 10 of them. How do they work? And I think the police is involved, right? That's correct. Within our own organization, we have a small hub because I don't want to call it an innovation club, you know, saying, okay, innovation goes on over there and we do other things. Military innovation by doing, that's what we call it. So no, it's not talking, it's doing. And I find that very important. So we challenge each other to start working on innovation. And it's, again, the central ecosystem, the golden ecosystem that we've already referred to. And, of course, you know, looking at how you can progress. If you look at those 10 hubs, then definitely the police is very much part of that. The great building that we're in today, Bolidt. Last year we were guests there as well. I think once every 6 weeks we have a regional day. I always attend to be able to talk to all these different companies, and the police is also represented. And we talk to these businesses, you know, and we ask them, what do you run into? What are your ideas? And this is just one of the building blocks to make sure that all the innovation hubs can get to work. Of course, you were talking to Mr. Hille, the Defense Organization, police. You know, security doesn't stop where the police mandate ends and the defense mandate begins. And same applies to Innovation Hub. So don't work in your own silo. Say that you make it a joint effort. And again, under pressure of this pandemic, we are learning so much. So final words. We are talking about the small and medium-sized enterprises that are having much more trouble to keep up. Do you have anything to say in how the government can involve the small and medium-sized enterprises in a better way? Well, I do a lot of business in the US, and you have a small business criterion. Acknowledging that innovation usually comes from smaller companies, in that case, government in a tender procedure. Small companies, if they qualify, they can be qualified as a small enterprise, especially when they're led by a veteran. Then smaller and medium-sized enterprises have in a point system, they have higher credits to also be able to qualify for a certain tender. So that's great. And it's not that hard to set up. You know, if you provide those credits, you rise in the ranks. But then again, of course, your startup does have to make a difference. You have to have a great product. Yes, obviously. And then finally, Mr. Dicke, the State Secretary has written a production industry letter. So what does that letter mean and why is it relevant? Yes, of Economic Affairs. Yes. The State Secretary of Economic Affairs, absolutely. It is a letter that sees to where we are going with the industry. So it's policy making for the industry, and the defense organization and industry has a great spot. And now it's up to us, to all of us, government, politics, the industry itself, to make sure that we live up to what they're asking, making sure that we can supply customized solution. And also, based on what Harald was saying, if you look at what we do with the European Defence Fund, it's a big fund in Europe, then being the Dutch government, both defence and economic affairs, we really promoted involvement of the small and medium-sized enterprises. Okay, we unfortunately have to leave it at that. I would like to thank all 4 of you for being with us and commenting on the videos. I think everybody at home will be able to find you if they have great ideas or whether they have questions. And also you have rooted for the smaller and medium-sized enterprises. I'm now walking over to the other side and I'm going to go to the big screen. Because on the big screen, the State Secretary of Defense is here and I already see her. Barbara Visser, great to have you with us. You are in quarantine, aren't you?
Yes, I am in home isolation. But you feel well? I do have corona and I have a slight cold. But besides from the feeling of a cold, you're okay. Yes, I'm fine. We will only have a brief conversation together. And indeed, there are elections in March next year. So it may be true that this is your final visit to NEDS. It could be. What is your view on 4 years? Well, these were even 3 years. It may seem like 4 to you, but these were 3 years that really went very fast. Lots of things have happened, and I am very proud as a defense organization that we really committed to improve our people, to make sure that we have more tools, more weapon systems that they need, and at the same time have introduced improvements in our organization with regard to security, but also more powers for commanders. We heard Prince Constantijn also earlier in this program, and he talked about startups, and he reported that startups often find it difficult to find a defense organization, that it's a big step, that it's difficult to get started. Could NIDV take up that role, or do you see other solutions for this? Absolutely. I think that NIDV is also accepting this role. In the past few years, as a state secretary, I was happy to visit a lot of businesses, sometimes startups. Now, unfortunately, it's not possible anymore. And they have problems with every desk at the defense organization where they enter, actually. And lots of people, lots of officers change positions, so it's very difficult to have good contacts. Indeed, NIDV is indeed helping these businesses, not just within the defense organization, but also in Europe, to make sure how can we cooperate and make sure that our businesses benefit from this market, because there are many opportunities if cooperation is better. And indeed, you are in contact with your foreign colleagues, France, Germany. They are buying new aircraft. They are working on investment programs. Are there matters of which you believe we can learn from the approach that they are using over there? Well, luckily, we can learn lessons, but what I noticed even this week, and I would have a contact with my German contact today, once every 6 months, we will always discuss all the material projects that we expect to be doing in the next 10 to 15 years, to make sure that we know whether we have an opportunity to cooperate, because we have experienced that when we cooperate in an international coalition, that the demands are similar, so you can be sure that indeed that you can communicate together. There will be continuity. So by doing these practical matters, it's something that I learned. Cooperation internationally is only effective if you make it very practicable. And on the other hand, you will learn lessons by looking at the way they approach material purchasing and how they look at automation. This applies to the French, to the Germans, and indeed we are cooperating. We are already doing so with the German partners to pick up a number of IT projects together. You notice that the importance of security is much more acknowledged. More money is spent on the defense organization. You wrote a vision. And I think that you believe that 13 to 37 billion euros should be spent extra on the defense organization. And you are shining and smiling when I ask this question. Now, the defense organization is a very large organization and we are in an economic crisis. And of course, the question is, can we do it? Can we focus on the defense organization? What would be the strategy to make sure that we are in focus? Well, indeed, by presenting the vision. So that's what we did. We started in this cabinet to spend 1.5 billion euros extra each year structurally. And we said it's not enough when we started that. The organization needs more. We stated that we would write a vision that would be multi-annual for 15 years to see what the organization really needs when we talk about security of the Netherlands, but also the Kingdom of the Netherlands. That's our vision. In all the draft programs of the political parties, none of them say that they want to cut budgets for the defense organization. They aim for the 2% that NATO wants. Well, it's not the 13 to 37 billion euros, but this vision is for 2035, but I think it would be a good signal. This vision indeed gives the signal, if you take security seriously, you will have to invest in the defense organization. And that will be a challenge for the minister and myself, but also for the commanders of all the defense organizations. We drafted this together. We did it together, and we will, of course, promote it together. Now, when we talk about working differently, cooperating more with businesses, that's what we will do.
Ook een nieuw kabinet. Is er de...
Next year, there will be a new NEDS, a new cabinet too. You may not have the same position. What would you like to tell your successor? What's the main thing? Well, first of all, that the successor will be faced with a great organization in which a lot of engaged people work. So that's important. And what I would like to say is, indeed, finish what we started. It may sound very practical, but make sure that all the buildings on military sites have Wi-Fi, to make sure that the clothes are there, very practical matters for our people. Continue that, but also invest in new technologies to make us ready for the future. And we invested in that. I thought that Arie was also there. He may have told you what happened in the past period. And I hope that we can continue that, because we are important. So we have a tight schedule. We also have a tight schedule. This is all we can accommodate for. We hope that you will recover soon. And with regard to the elections, I hope that we will see you a lot towards the elections, but keep up the strength and stay safe. And let's move on to the next topic in the show, which is the final part of our show, which is the award of the Thesis Prize. It will not be done by myself, but by the Deputy Commander, Lieutenant General Onno Eigelsheim. And the floor is his.
Thank you, Roderik. And indeed, I have the honor to present the Jan Gmelich Thesis Prize. And it is 5 years ago that it was created by NIDV to, in the end, tighten the connection between the academies, the technical universities, the police academies, and the knowledge institutions, and the physical safety and security institute, and of course the Dutch industry and defense organization, to bring that all together and strengthen that. 5 years ago we started this. And I have the honor to award the prize for 2020. And it was not an easy choice. Again, this year it wasn't easy. Chair of the jury with such great projects that in general are all equal when it comes to quality level. Not easy to make that choice. We have 3 nominees, however. Lonneke van Bemmel of the Dutch Defense Academy, who has written a thesis about and Pascal, who wrote a thesis on a moral compass with the police academy, and then thesis of Koen Snell, Technical University Delft, and I'm going to read it.
Models using machine learning. En eigenlijk alle 3
all of those subjects, so including the first one of brain infringement, are very, very topical. And this is why it was so difficult to make a choice as a chair of the committee. And I would like to give you the opportunity to give a very brief pitch, a minute, to explain as to what your thesis was about. And what, of course, made you do it. Lonneke, what about you? Giving you the opportunity first for your pitch about brain infringement.
Your pitch about, indeed, brain infringement. I answered the question, is entering the brain by means of a brain-computer interface to indeed find the passwords, etc., is it in accordance with Article 6 of the ECHR? With the brain-computer interface, it is possible to make sure that thoughts of a person can be decoded and can be translated into actions. And there's also the nemo-tonator principle that nobody can be obliged to cooperate in its own conviction, so cannot be obliged to be a witness against himself. The result of my thesis is that when I want to apply brain-computer interface to find perpetrator knowledge, that it's against the nemo-tonator principle. But when I apply it in order to find passwords and PIN codes, which will also give me access to the perpetrator knowledge, it needn't be contrary to the nemo-tonator principle. Now, it would be good for the future because when we take into account the mental situation of the suspect, it could indeed make sure that there are safeguards and we would indeed be able to solve digital criminality. This is a good basis, and that's something for the future. That is what my research was about. Not just a basis, because eventually you decided to continue. Yes, I want to start a master's in criminal law because I believe that we can take a few next steps. I'm looking for an institution that will indeed allow me the opportunity. But I hope that the basis of this research project will show that I can do more. I'm working on the future and I want to do it in this field, definitely. And indeed, you are able to do lots of things because you already finished the thesis. You will move on to the next one. So the future is looking great for us and also for you. And Pascal, the moral compass, can you give us some explanation? Yes, indeed. Good afternoon. I started a study into the moral compass in the police organization. I looked at the role of moral knowledge as a police officer that wanted to use a firearm. There were a few results. First of all, that knowledge that is used when there is enough cognitive space, that indeed the rules that exist are used. But when there is pressure on the cognitive opportunities, then people will go back to intuition and the rules may not be that relevant anymore. A very important third finding is that the fact that you suppose that there's a context, does it mean that indeed you can act morally, or will you maybe also act immorally because although your intentions were very pure? So that's in short the findings of my study. And not alone applicable to the police organization, but in more fields. And therefore, it is very interesting for not just police officers, but for the entire security chain. Yes, indeed. And I can indeed imagine that it can be applied in more fields in the police. And also with regard to accountability, if we want to give account based on the law, it may be different than when we have to account for acting upon emotion or intuition. Now, from the moral compass, we move over to machine learning, a totally different approach, the one that you chose, Koen, at TU Delft. In order to determine how the construction strength of a ship is, you need a lot of computing capacity. And simulators will take a long time. Now, if you want to define whether a machine vessel can return to port safely, you need a lot of simulations. In various fields, there has been introductions with regard to computer models, and I thought we could perhaps use them when we develop marine vessels or normal vessels. In my study, I researched whether AI can be used to determine the construction strength, the structural strength of vessels. And indeed, it can, and it can do it faster than normal methods. By accelerating the process, AI can do more strength analysis in the same period. And by performing more analysis, the ship will be better and will be safer for our military officers. And this is a first step. How great is this? That in a shorter period of time than we do now, we can indeed execute these strength calculations with AI. It's a very good study that you performed, Koen. But unfortunately, only one of you can win today. And it means that we monitored a number of scores and a number of elements in these. The thesis that achieved the highest score had three key levels that were important. The academic level, but also value to society. And eventually, to what extent is a result of a thesis usable for improving the organization and innovating an organization. These were the three key elements on which eventually we decided who would be the winner of this thesis award. Now, the winner of the Jan Gemelig Meilingprijs for 2020 is... It's still exciting, isn't it? The winner is Lonneke van Bemmel with her thesis on brain infringement. Lonneke, I would like to give the award to you. Here you are, 2,500 euros linked to it, but I think the honor of being awarded this prize is much more important. And in the summer of 2021, you can join the Navy and sail with them for a day. Good luck in continuing your thesis. Thank you very much. I'm really happy, and also the experience to be here today, the invitation, the nomination, and also these great other nominees, to meet them. And of course, the prize is good, but the experience at the Navy, that's great. I never expected that this would be the reward for my thesis. Well, it's well deserved. And once again, the future's open to you. The future's open to all three of you. And of course, we have something. All of you will receive a bunch of flowers to take home. But please continue using the expertise that you have, developing it, taking these theses and making sure that they end up on the shop floor, because your efforts will make this organization safer, the world safer, and eventually the armed forces and the security chain will perform better. Thank you very much. And I would like to say have a nice evening and enjoy it, mainly to you. Thank you. Well, indeed, and by awarding this prize for the 5th time, this is now the end of the program, and we will end with where we started. Mr. Hillen, with you. At the start, you said NIDVE was resilient. We also learned how all of the other organizations really went through this crisis and survived it. Well, it's inspiring. Yes, indeed. People are not being sorry for themselves. No, they get to grips with it. And I wanted to compare it to 10 years ago when we had the Greek crisis. We started cutting budgets, taking money everywhere. And instead of cutting budgets, we now took money to the businesses. We took money to the economy, to the consumer spending. And we can see in the newspapers this morning, the Netherlands statistics said that the recovery is better than they thought. So indeed, this was a lesson learned. So I'm very optimistic about the future. I hope that we will indeed get to grips with Corona quick and soon. So we learned a lot from the other crisis, but also from this crisis, and we handled it well so far. For the people that indeed joined us from home, we would now have drinks. Unfortunately, we can't, but there is a network feature in the environment that you use. On the left-hand side of your screen, you can see it. When you click it, indeed, you can join all the other persons that attend, and online you can indeed share your ideas. Mr. Hillen, we started in the pub at 4 o'clock. It was a bit too early, but now it's 5:30. Let's say, let's have a beer. Indeed. Now, indeed, a beer and a gin, perhaps. Yes, why not? Let's see what we can do.
Kijk nou toch.